begins with a tribute to the late, great, beloved Joan Rivers. She should rest in peace. Because what was her most important line? Uttered every time, immediately after she made a tasteless joke and the audience rebelled. What would Joan Rivers then say?
Get over it?
No, say good, say better. She'd say, grow up!
Grow up, yes.
Okay? So tonight's shir begins with the challenge, grow up already. Why am I saying that? Because I couldn't repeat most of the other things that she talked about. That's not, no. Live and be well. Well, she can't do that anymore either. We should live and be well, and she should rest in peace. In any case, to return. If you are a child, you maintain a certain relationship with Megillat Esther and with Purim, right? It is not a totally healthy relationship, right? It is based upon your grogger and upon a certain bloodlust, which is bred into Jewish children, because every one of them, you can't really avoid it, knows exactly what happens to Haman in the story, and they wait. You know, they wait. Now, there's only one problem with the Megillah. It doesn't seem to know how to end. Because once Haman has been hanged, everybody wants to, let's finish this up already, let's go to the party, we have to, Sarah is still baking for Shalach Manas at that point, into the middle of the night. Let's get this show on the road. And we have this long thing in the Megillah. All of a sudden, Mordechai and Esther, they're writing letters, and they're sending letters. And in the letters they're saying, next year you should do again what we said in the letter. This great locomotive narrative seems to slow down and become the little engine that no longer could. And this is a child's view of the Megillah. Now, adults, tonight I'm actually not going to go extensively into Mefarshim, into rabbinic literature. We're going to stay in the text. However, we're actually going to work with two texts. What are the two texts? This is a theory, a construct, which will help you in the study, especially of biblical narrative. Why? Because particularly in those stories that are most familiar to us, we keep a kind of a version of what we assume is in the book. That's our default version of the story. So I'll ask you a wonderful question. Tell me your version of what happens after the story gets boring. What happens after we hang Haman? What is the rest of the Megillah?
Undoing the evil decree.
Okay, now Lawrence, who I did not tell him to say this, he's playing very nicely, undoing the evil decree. And in so undoing, what happens when we undo?
They didn't.
What?
They went out and they also killed.
500,000. And you said a very good word, a very interesting word. You said, what word in what she said was very interesting? Also. Now, I don't know about you, perhaps my default version has more faults than your default version. I always imagined as a kid that this day had been declared as a day of legalized pogroms. Yeah. And the only difference was that now with information, now with the second letter for Mordechai, the Jews at least could fight back, i.e. Also, so let me ask you something. Tell me the truth. You just heard Haman, his house had. Do you find that surprising? You didn't know that I was
No.
considered a master of the art of. I can actually do it in different keys. But I digress. Reno only edited out anyway. I have no idea what I was talking about. If Haman has just been publicly disgraced, right? Mordechai, the Jew, the most visible, and one of the things about the story is that unlike Esther, Mordechai never changes his profile as HaYehudi. Mordechai is now the most powerful man in the government aside from the king. What kind of an idiot is going to show up for that pogrom?
Good question.
Do you catch my drift,
Only
Dwight
greedy
Dwayne?
ones.
You'd have to be an idiot. Everything is now against you. And if you carefully read in the Megillah, and this is where our tale really takes off, if you look at what it says, that is not what happened. There was no counter, there was no pogrom against the Jews. So them, so what? So Fanny wants to know, so who were all those people that were killed?
Then we'll get 500,000.
No, don't. Maybe for inflation. Since last year, the numbers have gone up. Okay, so let's take a look. Now, even by the Tzipora rule, we can now give you some paper, because this is the actual text of the key verses in the Megillah. This is not a distraction. This is all there is. This is it.
Because it was the whole empire, it wasn't just Persia.
It was all of the
Surrounding area,
surrounding areas.
but not Egypt.
Yes, Lily. 1 second, we were about to solve a problem of a lifetime. This has always bothered Lily. This is going to be her first unburdened.
Haman was hung.
Yeah, after Haman was
The
hanged.
Jews went out and pilfered and robbed and,
Oh, so in her version of the story, now I'm going to ask you to look carefully tonight, Lily, because you raised a very excellent question. It's embarrassing that after Haman has already been hanged, that the Jews are taking advantage, you say, of their opportunity, and they're going out and doing unspeakable things. Let's speak of the speakable and the unspeakable. First of all, let us remember, if we went back to the 3rd chapter of the Megillah, let us remember some of the key ideas that went into the original edict, the one promulgated by Haman with the king's cooperation. Because what was his argument? Yeshno am echad mefuzar meforad bein ha'amim b'chol medinos malchusecho v'dosehem shonos mikol am. There is a people who is diffuse. They're everywhere, but they're nowhere. And they exist as a kind of an invisible fifth column. And they follow their own rules. And then he says, V'dosei hamelech eino mosim. And they're not obedient to the king. And then he says, if you don't mind, I would like to have them destroyed. Ve'aseres alofim kikar kesef eshkol al yedei osei hamelachol lohavi el ginzei hamelech. And there'll be a few bucks for it, for you in it as well. We know that. Now let's take a look at what was the order. Now this time, Lily, this is the order given of what was permitted to be done to the Jews. right? Lehashmid, leharog, ule'abed, to destroy them, to murder them, to extirpate them. I try to say that word at least once or twice during each day. It sort of clears the sinuses. Es kol ha-Yehudim, all of the Jews, minar vad zaken tafenoshim b'yom echad, all of the Jews from young to old, children and women in one day, and he gives the thing. And he tells us in verse 15, V'haratzim yotzu dechufim b'dvar hamelech. And the runners took this proclamation and they went out dechufim, which means they were put on at top speed. They were urged, right? The translation from 1917 that you have here says they went out in haste. Now we turn ourselves to the 8th chapter. I have deprived you of the highlight of the children, namely, Haman is already hanging by the time we get to this verse. In a sense, as far as your child self is concerned, the good part is already over. That's why I love this material. So what happened? Vayomahu nasan hamelech Achashverosh leEsther hamalka es beis Haman sorer haYehudim. He gave Esther Haman's estate, his whole household. U'Mordechai ba lifnei hamelech ki higida Esther mahulah. And Mordechai comes before the king to be presented because now Esther has finally acknowledged their relationship. And Mordechai, don't forget, he just keeps popping up. You know, he pops up in the story and then he's leading the horse and he's the one that the tree was planned for, that Haman ends up, you know whating on. Right? Very important verse, verse 2. Vayasar hamelech es tabato asher ha'avir meHaman. And the king takes off his ring, which he had taken away from Haman. Vayitno leMordechai. And he gives Mordechai the ring, which of course is the seal of the king of Persia, and which carries with it what, Doc? The ability.
Power.
Tremendous power. And Mordechai, you know, Mordechai thinks he's getting a gift of jewelry. Right? Ooh, nice ring, a little gaudy. I wouldn't wear it to shul. But it's, you know, he thinks he's getting, it's like a gold watch. But it's not a gold watch, folks.
I have trouble with that,
What?
that he wouldn't know what a signet ring is.
Maybe he did. But we'll see. I'll prove to you why I think he didn't realize the real implications of it. So what happens then? I have skipped some lines. And this because I have Rachmanis on the forests of North America and on Rena. How much can we print? And I have removed the passage which you all know very well. The passage which says, and Esther again came before the king and asked that the decree be canceled. Now, just so you know, for your own edification, there is a very great debate as to whether this discussion happened at the same time as the other one. In other words, was this more at the same meal, or whether Esther indeed took her life in her hands a second time standing, and again went into the king without being bidden. And as those of you who follow the Kriya will be able to see on Purim, the king lifts his scepter again. So in a certain sense, it's like, I don't want to draw this comparison too much because it's probably been darshaned already. It's a little bit like the first luchos, the first tablets, and the second tablets. Esther's first interview is done with great fanfare and everybody fasts and everybody's a nervous wreck about it. The second time, she is actually in just as much danger. only this time, either because she believes the king really does care for her, or as I would prefer to interpret it, she has come to realize that holding her own life cheap in the service of God and the Jewish people is the most exalting experience that a human being can have. And so whereas the first time she was really frightened that she would be killed, she's lost her fear. She has found a positive value more powerful than even the love of life itself. And so the second time she goes before the king, I think the Lashon of the Pasuk is about Tosef, she just goes right, does it again. But that's not what I'm interested in. What I'm interested in is the king has, by the time I get to Pasuk Zion, at the top of page 2, the king has already said, sorry, I cannot rescind the decree. So just a minute, I'd like you to pause where you were, just a minute. Sometimes the most important things happen when somebody says no. No is not the end, no is the beginning. What would have happened, Bubby Beverly, when Mordechai and Esther, after Haman's been, first make their request? Please, please, please take away the, please, please, please. What would have happened? What were they looking for? What would they have settled for? Anyway. They wanted the status quo. Just don't hurt us, don't hit us, don't punch us, or pinch us, or beat us up, or throw rocks at us.
Or kill us.
Or kill us, just leave us alone. Classic Jewish eternal PTSD. Our entire history is one post-trauma until the next trauma. Right? We're either in T or P. Those are our two modes. Post-traumatic or traumatic. That's where we are. Right? So they are saying essentially, make the bad people go away. And Achashverosh, who may not be as big an idiot as everybody portrays him. Achashverosh offers a very interesting instruction. Vayomer hamelech Achashverosh leEsther hamalka uleMordechai haYehudi. He says to Esther and Mordechai, look at your situation. Hinei veis Haman nasati leEsther. I gave her his entire, I'm saying Beis Haman, his estate. Right? V'oso tolu ala eitz asher shalach yodo ba'Yehudim. And he is hanging on a tree. Now understand, hanging doesn't mean just choking him to death. Hanging means leaving him out as a symbol and as a warning. Here is what we do to anti-Semites. So just know, he's still out there. He's still hanging. And the Atem kisvu al hayudim katov be'einechem b'shem hamelech. You may now write, promulgate anything you want concerning the Jews in the name of the king, v'chismu b'tabas hamelech, and you can seal it with the king's signet. That's where I may have overstated just a little bit, Doc. But what I'm saying is, you know what this reminds me of? Just so you'll know my childish associations. Anyone who's known me for more than 15 minutes, what is my favorite movie?
Wizard of Oz.
Absolutely.
Which one?
The Wizard of Oz. Absolutely. What is the most remarkable moment at the Wizard of Oz that this is reminding me of? Dorothy has been schlepping around Mit the yellow brick road, mit the monkeys, mit the witch, mit the zeh, mit the zeh, mit the zeh. The whole time she's schlepping in those heels. Right? Forget the flying monkeys, her feet were killing her. She's wearing the ruby slippers. Right? And Glenda, the good witch, how good could she be if she let her schlep the whole time and didn't tell her about the darn shoes? And she says, don't you know, you're wearing the ruby slippers. All you need to do is tap them together and say, there's no place like home. There's no... I can't believe I'm doing this for a camera. I will go down in history as the person who had more imaginative ways to end a rabbinic career than anyone in the history of the planet. I thought I'd done pretty well already, but I'm just finishing it off with the ruby slippers. All right. What Achashverosh is saying to Mordechai is, the answer is in that rock you're wearing on your hand. If you have been given the ring, which is the Tabas HaMelech, you can write your own ticket. And all of a sudden, there is a paradigm shift. Why? Because all of a sudden, Mordechai realizes that they don't have to go back to the status quo. They don't have to go back to a Persian Empire in which there are pockets of anti-Semites waiting in every province. So all you have to do is send out a letter like Haman sent out, and all of these chapters of the KKK rise up from their invisibility, and they're ready to be at our throats. So what does Mordechai do? So first of all, they call in all these people. Vayichtom, I'm in verse 10. If you like to follow in the English, you find it on the bottom and on the next page. And he says, they signed and they sent this message with the runners, right? Asher nosan hamelech la Yehudim asher b'chol ir v'ir. The king has sent permission to the Jews in every single city. For you, lehi kohel, to gather together, v'lamod al nasham, and to stick up for themselves, lehashmid ulaharog ula'abed, es kol chel am umedina hatzarim osam, tap v'nashim v'shalom navos. They can, where's that language from?
The decree of the first.
It's from the first decree. And young and old, and women and children, and you may despoil their property. You can take everything they have. This is the part that embarrassed you, right?
I found very good. Every time I read it,
I am going. Trust.
They wouldn't have shown any more mercy.
You could just spell Rosenblatt, R-O-L-A-I-D-S, because I'm going to bring you relief. Okay? We're going to relieve your suffering. And it can be in one day, right? And what was the overall thing? Take a look at Yud Gimel, the last words. Lihinokem me oivehem. To take vengeance from their enemies. Their enemies doesn't mean people who would show up on that day to make a pogrom. What kind of idiot's going to make a pogrom when Yenim is hanging and the thing and the Jews are in charge? They're not going to make a pogrom then. Right? He came to take vengeance me oivehem. And this time, notice haratzim rochavei harechesh ha'achash teronim yotzu muvohalim udechufim. This not, before they went out only dechufim, this time they go out even more supercharged in their he says, hastened and pressed on. But it means that this came from something else. It sounds like this time the runners are not running only with their professional zeal. I would like to believe this time they really care. They are out there and they're running. And this is very important in verse 15 because it comes at a very strange place. O Mordechai yotza milifnei hamelech bilevush malchus, and Mordechai just at this moment emerges in royal raiment, tcheles v'chur v'ateres zahav gedolah v'tachritz boots v'argaman v'ha'ir shushan tzahalav v'samecha. And upon his emergence, this really, doesn't this sound Lahavdil Elef Havdalos? Like when the curtain parts on the balcony in St. Peter's Square, and there the pontiff that pilgrims have come from all over the world to see is suddenly revealed in all his beautiful vestments. When Mordechai emerges, and it is precise because his emergence is a Mordechai transformed. The fact that we are given this running description of his outfit, right, means that up to now he's been Mordechai HaYehudi. Something has changed. He is the embodiment of majesty. He is clothed in the levush malchus, in the raiments of royalty. And it's very interesting. It doesn't say the Jews of Shushan. All of Shushan responds to Mordechai HaYehudi. Now this is going to be very important for mathematical reasons. Because I'm going to show you something I never noticed before. Something very interesting about the numbers of people that the Jews actually dealt with on that day. Now what happens? We're told, La Yehudim hoisa ora v'simcha v'sosam b'yikar. It was a day of special light and gladness and rejoicing and honor for the Jews. And Yud Zayin is interesting. ובכל מדינה ומדינה ובכל עיר ועיר מקום אשר דבר המלך ודסו מגיע ששון ושמחה ליהודים משתה ביום טוב. The Jews were going crazy. ורבים מעמי הארץ מתייהדים.
Converted.
Now, thank you. Was that from you, Tzivia?
Yeah, converted.
The standard classic translation here is that in the wake of this surge in the popularity of Jews and Mordechai and everybody else, that many of the people of the land, Misyahadim, became Jewish. And now we know this phenomenon, right? Because, for example, in the first 10 or 15 years of the state of Israel, even maybe more, I would say 25 years, when I was a student in Israel in the late 70s, you were still meeting young, intelligent Germans and Scandinavians who came to Israel and converted to Judaism. So there was such a phenomenon. However, I suspected when I read this and I learned that there are other Mefarshim who say Misyadim doesn't mean they became Jews.
Superficial.
Well, because we would have to ask a question. If they really converted to Judaism, then what? Then where the heck are they? I mean, we didn't have a sudden tripling of the size of the Jews of the Persian Empire. Misyadim, I don't believe it means they converted. I think it means they acted as if they had always loved Jews.
Oh, like in Denmark or Holland, they put on yellow stars.
Well, no, because there they did it in the thick of it. I'm talking more about people, and I don't know that this is a phenomenon. I certainly don't want to cast any aspersions. But it certainly seems to me that there may have been people in places like Poland and the Ukraine,
Yeah.
when after the war they saw the adulation which was showered on those very, very few who risked their lives to save the Jews, all of a sudden they started remembering how they did this good thing for the Jews and they that good thing for the Jews. They quickly ran to the cemetery and polished the gravestones of the people they probably murdered. But misyahadim means that in this atmosphere, the anti-Semites went underground. They didn't dare. And this is a phenomenon which is being discussed very much right now, because what we're realizing in the wake of certain political things, that there are deep pockets of racism and anti-Semitism in our country, which over the past couple of decades have been driven underground. And it just wasn't something that you said in polite society. But those who just covered the convention of the far-right conservative ideologues, what one of the reporters noted was, not from the leadership, but from among the young people, the college people, the language of white supremacy, which, by the way, is the language, don't get too comfortable, the language of white Christian supremacy, has come out in a way which is unembarrassed and unambiguous. It was probably in attitude, it was probably always there.
But they were
But-
embarrassed.
but they were
After
embarrassed.
World War II, they laid low.
No, more than that.
Well, at various
And
points.
at
I don't know if
various
they-
Certainly
points,
it
and it
they
didn't
felt
come out.
it was to their disadvantage to go public
Right.
in terms of.
And, but now, what we learn from this is that attitudes exist, but in different times they are either eclipsed or sometimes overexposed, where people pretend to embrace. So that's what the misyahadim is. Now, why would they put this right down? Ki nofal pachad haYehudim aleihem. They were scared to death. Why were they scared to death?
But it's the Amiha'aret, it's not the bad thing, it's just,
Amei Haaretz simply
just means just the general
the
thing.
general public.
Why? Because they were now in power. We had the
Yeah.
ring.
Because the Jews were in power, because the Jews had a mandate. What? The Jews' mandate was not a mandate to simply fight back against anyone who would raise arms against them. No. The mandate of Mordechai was to eliminate anti-Semitism from the Persian Empire once and for all. It was, I would suggest to you, a surgical procedure. I would go further and tell you that what the last part of the Megillah is, the part that children don't pay any attention to, has more in common with the Nuremberg trials than anything else.
Could you explain? I'm not following this.
Yes, and thank you for saying so, because most people, when they don't understand what I'm talking about, because it probably didn't make sense, they go, oh yeah. Then they go out, and they go, you know what he was talking about? I don't know. When Mordechai first, I'm going to hold, Sonia, you got to tell me, I'm going to say it, you have to tell me that if you understand it, and if not, I'll say it a third way, okay? When Mordechai and Esther first asked the king to roll back Haman's decree, all they were asking was, make it like it was the day before Haman. But after Haman, the world had discovered something. The world had discovered that in every province of Persia, Haman had willing henchmen. Otherwise, his thing would have been no threat. Big deal. A guy from Shushan sends a letter out into the boonies. Who cares? The only reason it was important was because there were those who were ready to carry this out on the 13th. And so, when the king says to Mordechai, he essentially says to him, that's what you want? Aside from the fact that I can't technically do it, that's all you want from me is to turn back to what it was the day before so that all of the snakes can slither back under their rocks? Go for broke. Go into the empire and root out the evil. Go not, because the language it speaks about, sonehem, those who hate them. Go get rid of the people who hate you. And so so when I say it's like the Nuremberg trials, it is the cleansing of the Persian Empire of people who either did or would happily have participated in genocide against the Jews. It's a kind of a trial and execution. We're looking for haters of Jews. Yes, Jim?
You see, so I find that the Megillah so surprising because this reads like something from medieval Europe. This is, it seems, the first mention of anti-Semitism in the Bible. To the Babylonians and all these other people, the Jews were insignificant. They were just a pain in the neck, that, like any other people. But to single out Jews as a people, not for political, national reasons, it's just completely, I don't know, the Persian Empire was probably the most tolerant of them all.
Yeah.
So what this would, it just seems so far removed from the
It
rest of the
seems
Bible.
closer to what came after it than to what
Yeah.
came before it.
And the first real anti-Semitism was the Hellenistic Greeks and then the Christians. These ancient pagans, I don't think they care.
Well, in this case,
What?
well, Amalek is a good,
Amalek, they were a bunch of desert muggers that would have attacked anyone.
we don't know that.
I mean,
That's interesting reading, but it's not all.
Yeah.
Yes, Al?
How do you evaluate Achashverosh, who in the beginning is so eager to comply with Haman's wishes to kill the Jews, and then he's just as eager to comply with Mordechai and Esther's desire to defend the Jews and kill the original enemies? I mean, he vacillates from anti-Semite to being very Jewish-minded. I mean, how do you account
I'm
for
not
that?
sure he was ever Jewish-minded. I do think
But
that,
he-
and this
so
is for
easily
Maybe
for
so much
another
to threaten
discussion.
himself.
I think that he recognized Haman as a megalomaniac who ultimately was dangerous to him. In other words, and he began to see the quality of the service of Mordechai, which is going to come up in other things. But it's really it's a wonderful question, but it's really stuff for another shiur.
Like Hitler started with the Jews, and then that was just a way of seizing international power, and then people realized that he's a threat.
Right. Come with me back for a little more of the language. I'm going to get to you, Lily. I didn't forget you. Don't worry. We have to go in order. And it says the Jews gathered together, and this is very important in verse 2. This is to finally lay to rest Fanny's childhood.
Yes, I know there was a five
But
there.
Megillah was written in Hebrew originally?
I think so. Gimel.
I know it was 5.
And all of the officers, that's not the wrong one. The one before that, Beis, excuse me. Nikalu haYehudim ba'arehem b'chol medinos hamelech Achashverosh. The Jews gathered themselves together, right? The hammer of God. Lishloach yad, to strike at mivakshay ra'asam, those who sought their harm. A very general term. The ish lo amad lifnehem ki nafal pachdam al kol ha'amim. And no one resisted. There was no counter-pogrom. There was no shot fired, essentially. The Jews moved against their enemies, and no one resisted them. And as far as the leadership are concerned, Menas'im es hayudim ki naval pachad Mordechai alehem. Remember, there are two different levels here. One is a sense of the ascendancy of the Jews as a group, and in the leadership, the sense of the great ascendancy of Mordechai. And Mordechai is much more terrifying than Haman because he is not a creature of vanity. He doesn't sit around wondering who's bowing down and who's not bowing down. He has a plan.
Is there any sense here of Mordechai as being based Shaul?
Well, we know that he's from...
Yeah, well, but is that sense of Malchus coming through here?
It's an interesting theory. I'll have to think about it. Okay?
I mean, you've been talking about Malchus as being given the big day of the king, and
Right.
and he's appearing as
I think there's more Yosef in Mordecai than Shaul. Yosef is what comes to mind as the great viceroy. Now notice, in verse 5, I'm rushing a little now, and the Jews smote their enemies, Makascher v'hereg v'avadon, they destroyed them, Vayasu b'sonehem kirtsonom, and they did whatever they wanted. And how many people did they kill? Uvashushan avira hargo ayudim ve'abeid, 500 people.
500.
500
It was long ago.
it's not a huge number relative.
But that's only and you don't know what they
And
did
they
else
killed
then.
the sons of Haman. Wait. Let's go on to the next page, if I can figure out how to turn these pages. So we get the sons of Haman, who were among those killed in Shushan, except for one little thing. I would like Lillian to join me at the end of verse 10. I'm on page 4. Page 4, I'm about to fix your whole life. Even though what? The Jews were given permission to do exactly what Haman had liked. Because remember this, Haman's paying him off twice. When Haman says that he's going to give 10,000 whatevers to the king, how do you get all those people in the provinces interested? Because it was shlolom lavos. No, you don't have to pay them. Let them take what they want. How many Jewish homes, how many Jews were turned over to the Nazis so that their neighbors could pillage what they had in their homes? So that shlolom lavos was built in as an incentive. You could get as many thugs as you wanted if you promised they can keep what they catch. When the King of France marched through Europe, marched to Italy in the reign of Alexander VI, Pope Alexander VI, those troops, he paid them very little, but they could keep what they could grab, and they pillaged some of the great cities of Italy. So, but what about these Jews at the end of verse 10? Uvavizol lo shachules yodam. Despite the fact that they were given permission, the Jews did not loot. The Jews didn't take anything. Feel better?
That's, yeah, but the thing when I read...
I was hoping for a little more gratitude than that. Yeah, but, okay.
I'm just saying that when I read the translation when they're reading the Megillah, and in the Siddur that I'm reading it in, the translation said that they killed and they pilfered.
No. Well, you read, you see, you mixed up two things. You read the sentence where they were given permission. They were told they could kill and pillage.
So I misunderstood.
But the Megillah, you don't trust me?
I trust you.
Look at
but
his
I want to
face.
see.
You're not trusting. But you will see, now that you look, you'll see
Because
it.
every year I read this and every year it bothers me.
And every year, what you need to notice is that the Megillah specifically makes a point of saying they could and they didn't.
Cool, okay.
Because they're wonderful people. These are my people.
My too.
The Jews were tough fighters. They weren't medieval, living in a ghetto. They were one generation away from Israel.
Okay.
That's it.
Right, they had not yet been.
They hadn't been so subdued and
So
subjugated.
what I'd like to now draw your attention, now 1 second. In the other, I want to do some more numbers. So the Jews got a second day in Shushan. In verse 15, how many did they add? Shalosh me'os ish. The second day, they got another 300. How many did they start with? First day, 500. Second day, 300.
Why is the
Total,
number so important?
800.
hey, no, I'll tell you in a minute why it is. And again, at the end of verse 15, Uvavizo lo shalchu es yodom, and they didn't take anything. And then, Ushahar hayudim asher b'mdinas hamelech nikalu, the other Jews in the diaspora, so to speak, outside of Shushan, how many did they kill? Omar al nafsham, they rid themselves of their enemies. And this time they killed of those who hated them, Chamisha v'shivim elef, 75,000. That is almost, do the math, ladies and gentlemen, that is almost 100 times more Jews than were killed in Shushan. Now, granted, you're talking about a wide, expansive territory, but you're not talking about such a huge Jewish population altogether. How many Jewish communities were there? But there must have been in these boonies, there were anti-Semites. Or, say good, say better. Mordechai is a very brilliant strategist. He's got to work in Shushan. He has to rule with the oligarchs. Some of them were probably anti-Semites. But if they had actually killed every anti-Semite, so imagine if you killed every anti-Semite in Washington. Basically, you could just put Maryland back together with Virginia because there'd be nothing in between. Right? So, Mordechai, it's almost a different strategy. In Shushan, what you see is this circumspection. So that the majority of the people in Shushan, the vast majority, the people they needed to rule this vast empire, were not exterminated, were not killed, were left to live another day and grateful for it. That's pretty clever. I like that. But in the provinces, why does it tell us the provinces? Because in the provinces you saw the depth of the anti-Semitism, and you saw the pent-up frustration and rage of the Jews, who knew that their neighbors, but for a change in the government, would have been in their house killing their children and their wives. Yes, Rick?
I don't mean to dispute you.
But you're going to anyway. Don't let that stop you.
Arithmetically, it was, I believe, Achashverosh ruled over 128 provinces. 127.
This is what happens when you let accountants come to you, Sharon.
So if I take 800 times 120, I did 128. I got a little over 102,000.
But that is assuming that...
So if you did 800 in every province...
I'm taking statistics, pal. But you are assuming that the population, that the Jewish population density in all of those provinces was equal to the population density in Shushan.
No, I'm not. These are the people that are killed.
I understand, but it means somebody had to kill them. And it means...
Okay, but they said that there is a verse that says that the king's officers, the governors, etc., basically were afraid of Mordecai, and basically they stood behind the Jews and they may have done most of the killing in the outer provinces.
That's interesting.
I'm just saying arithmetically, I don't think
It's
it's
not that
such
much
a-
worse.
I think it's
Okay.
actually worse in, and it may be worse in Shushan because they got 2 days to do it.
Okay.
This is like Vietnam and Korea put together almost.
Okay. What is remarkable, though, I will take this for you, Lily, also, even in the provinces where the Jews were where there was much less control over them, it says there too, they didn't touch any spoils. This was pure. Now, here we come to the last part of the story, and I'm just going to hold you for like 5 or maybe an hour and a half. There's another piece of this story. Because what do we have emerging here? For the first time, at least in the diaspora. All of a sudden, anti-Semitism is no factor. You have to imagine that this war on anti-Semites meant that, at least for the time being, anti-Semitism is no factor. So there's a real problem. Up to this point in the Megillah, what has brought the Jews together again and again? Fear. The knowledge that their existence was being threatened. So Mordechai and Esther are faced for the first time with the question of how do you preserve Jewish identity in the midst of Jewish power and prestige. How do you maintain the I hate to use the same word twice, I never do, the purity of the Jewish people when all of a sudden they can go anywhere and be a celebrity. Everybody loves them.
6-Day War?
What did you say?
The 6-Day War, it sounded like.
In a certain sense, yes. But the 6-Day War was lucky because when they came home to a Jewish country. If those Israel, and what happened after the 6-Day War, the big generals, oh my God, everywhere they went, they partied, right? They were the world's darlings. We're still paying for that period, in my opinion. But, so Esther and Mordechai are faced with a crisis. Because now there is the danger that Haman's accusation is actually going to come true. Mufozar mufarad bein ha'amim. These people will now be scattered to the winds. Everyone will want to be with them. Everyone will want to be their neighbor. Everyone will want to marry their children. So what did Mordechai and Esther do? So they write this, they establish Purim, but they establish it with several interesting things. First of all, in Pasuk Chav Zayin, Kimu v'kiblu haYehudim aleim v'al zar'am v'al kol hanilvim aleihem v'lo ya'avor liyos osim eshnei hayomim ha'eleh kichsavam chizmanom b'chol shana v'shana. First of all, they said, Kimu v'kiblu, the Jews accepted this moment as something to be held and preserved. Now, what is interesting here is the rabbinic tradition is that Kimu v'kiblu was actually a return to the revelation at Sinai. Why? The Gemara discusses this because at Sinai we have the tradition that God held the mountain over them and said, either you accept it or Shom take furaschem, this will be the end of you. And the Gemara says it was not until Persia, Jews who had been suddenly emancipated and glorified in the midst of a vast wealthy empire. Kimu v'kiblu means they asserted a positive Jewish identity. They took themselves back, as it were, to Mount Sinai and said, there is no more mountain over our heads. Nevertheless, we reaffirm the covenant. This is a covenantal moment. And how is this expressed? Aside from the keeping of Purim itself, those two mysterious mitzvos, where you have Mishloach Monos Ish L'Re'ehu and Matonos Le'Evyonim.
Who's Hanilvin?
Those who, I think, company.
No, but that might be an answer to what, that might be very relevant. So, those weren't Jews, those were others, that's like fellow travelers.
Good, needs to be looked into. Would be
They
like
were
Hanefesh Asher Asu B'Choron,
Yeah.
when there was an Eruvah. But what does that mean? The notion of Mishloach Monos Ish L'Re'ehu meant it was a counter to the temptation to universalism. In other words, Jews had to connect to Jews. There had to be a national fabric, a reassertion. And why was this so important? Because they realized, what was Purim? Purim is when they found themselves friendless, and there was no one who fasted for Esther before she went to the king. The Jews, the Jewish people united together. And so what Mordechai and Esther are saying, you must remember that moment of national interdependence, binding a community where people mean something to one another. And it expresses itself in two forms. Very interesting. It expresses itself in Mishloach Monos Ish L'Re'ehu, a kind of a peer embrace. Each to friends, to one's fellows. Once those are connected, then there has to be Matonos Le'Evyonim. That fabric, because at any given moment, there may be no threat of genocide, but at any given moment, some poor person's world is collapsing. Somebody is in the state of the trembling Esther going before the king for the first time. And in that moment, it is again the Jews who gather themselves together, the Jews who say we cannot be content if one of us is experiencing that personal sense of individual genocide, individual sorrow. And we will continue to respond to that and make it actually unnecessary for God to bring the whole people into peril. So what Mordechai and Esther are doing, just to summarize, the first is, for the first time, to understand that they actually have the power not only to defend themselves of a particular moment, but actually to rid the world of hatred, to rid the world of anti-Semitism, to change the entire landscape. But if one dares to remove that factor from the human experience, one better be prepared to replace it with some kind of a positive glue which can hold the people together. Something to live for besides not dying. And that is the holiness of Purim. Kimu v'kiblu, a reaffirmation of a covenantal existence, that we serve the will of the King of the universe, and Matonos Le'Evyonim and Mishloach Monos Ish L'Re'ehu, we are a people who continue to exist for one another in good times and, God forbid, in bad. Thanks, everybody, for coming. You are so wonderful.
Thank you.
Wonderful.